Chapter 97. When Carl told Dr. Mobley that Gus wanted to be transported to Texas to be buried, the little doctor merely smiled. "People have their whimsies," he said. "Your friend was a crazy patient. I imagine we'd have quarreled if he'd lived." "I imagine," Carl said, "but I intend to honor the wish." "We'll pack 'em in charcoal and salt," the doctor said. "It'll take a barrel or two. Luckily, there's a good salt lick not far from here." "I may need to leave 'em all winter," Carl said. "Is there a place I could store 'em?" "My harness shed would do fine," the doctor said. "It's well ventilated, and he'll keep better in the cool. Do you want his other leg?" "Well, where is it?" Cal asked, startled. "Oh, I've got it," the doctor said. "Contrary as he was, he might have asked me to sew it back on. It's a rotten old thing." Carl went outside and walked down the empty street to the livery stable. The doctor had told him to rest and had offered to locate the undertaker himself. The hell bitch looked up when he came into the livery stable where he had put her. He felt an impulse to saddle her and ride out into the country. But weariness overcame him, and he threw his bedroll on some straw and lay down. He couldn't sleep, though. He regretted not trying harder to save Gus. He should have disarmed him at once and seen that the other leg was amputated. Of course, Gus might have shot him, but he felt he should have taken the risk. It seemed he only dozed a minute when the sun streamed into the livery stable. Carl didn't welcome the day. All he had to think about were mistakes, it seemed, mistakes and death. His old rangering gang was gone. Only P.I. left, of all of them. Jake was dead in Kansas, Dietz in Wyoming, and now Gus in Montana. An old man named Gil owned the livery stable. He had rheumatism and walked slowly and with a limp, but he was a kindly old man with a rusty beard and one milky eye. He came limping in not long after Carl woke up. "I guess you need a coffin," the old man said. "Get Joe Weitenheimer. He'll make you a good one." "It'll have to be sturdy," Carl said. "I know," the old man said. "That's all the talk is in this town today, about the feller who wants to be hauled all the way to Texas to be stuck in the ground." He considered it his home, Carl said, seeing no reason to go into the part about the picnics. "My attitude is, why not? If he can find someone to tote him," old man Gil said. "I'd be buried in Georgia if I could have my way, but it's a far piece to Georgia and nobody's going to tote me, so I'll be buried up here in this cold," he added. "I don't like this cold. Of course, they say when you're dead, the temperature don't concern you, but who knows the truth on that?" "I don't," Carl said. "People got opinions, that's all they've got," the old man grumbled. "If somebody was to go and come back, now that's an opinion I'd listen to." The old man forked the hell bitch a little hay. When he stood watching her eat, the mare snaked out her neck and tried to bite him, causing the old man to stumble backward and nearly stumble over his own pitchfork. "Darn, she ain't very grateful," he said. "Struck at me like a snake, and I just fed her. Typical female. My wife done exactly the same 100 times. Buried her in Missouri, where it's considerable warmer." Carl found the carpenter and ordered a coffin. Then he borrowed a wagon and a team and a big scoop shovel from a drunken man at the hardware store. It struck him that the citizenry of Miles City seemed to drink liquor day and night. Half the town was drunk at dawn. "The lake's about 6 miles north," the hardware store man said. "You can find it by the game trails." Sure enough, several antelope were at the salt lick, and he saw the tracks of buffalo and elk. He worked up a sweat scooping the salt into the wagon. And when he got back to town, the undertaker had finished with Gus. The undertaker was a tall man with the shakes. His whole body trembled, even when he was standing still. "It's a nervous disease," he said. "I took it when I was young, and I had it ever since. I put extra fluid in your friend, since I understand he'll be above ground for a while." "Yep, until next summer," Cal said. "I don't know how he'll do," the undertaker said. If he weren't a human, you could smoke him like a ham. I'll try salt and charcoal, Carl said. When the coffin was ready, Carl bought a fine bandana to cover Gus's face with. Dr. Mobley brought in the leg he had removed, wrapped in some burlap and soaked in formaldehyde to cover the smell. A bartender and the blacksmith helped pack the charcoal in. Carl felt very awkward, though everyone was relaxed and cheerful. Once Gus was well covered, they filled the coffin to the top with salt and nailed it shut. Carl gave the extra salt to the drunk at the hardware store to compensate him a little for the use of his wagon. They carried the coffin around and put it in the doctor's harness shed on top of 2 empty barrels. "That'll do fine," Dr. Mobley said. "He'll be here, and if you change your mind about the trip, we'll just bury him. We'll have lots of company here. We've got more people in the cemetery already than we've got in town." Carl didn't like the implication. He looked at the doctor sternly. "Why would I change my mind?" he asked. The doctor had been nipping at a flask of whiskey during the packing and was fairly drunk. "Dying people get foolish," he said. "They forget they won't be alive to appreciate the things they ask people to do for them. And people make any kind of promise, but when they realize it's a dead creature they made the promise to, they usually squirm a little and then forget the whole business. It's human nature." "I'm told I don't have a human nature," Carl said. "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing," the doctor said. "The deceased paid me himself." "I'll get him in the spring," Carl said. When he got back to the livery stable, he found old man Gill drinking from a jug. It reminded him of Gus, for the old man would hook one finger through the loop of the jug and throw back his head and drink. He was sitting in the wheelbarrow, his pitchfork across his lap, glaring at the hell bitch. "Next time you come, why don't you just catch a grizzly bear and ride him in?" Gill said. "I'd rather stable a grizzly than this mare." "She bite you or what?" "No, but she's biding her time," the old man said. "Take her away so I can relax. I ain't been drunk this early in several years, and it's just from having her around." "We're leaving," Carl said. "Now, why would you keep a creature like that?" the old man said once Carl had her saddled. "Because I like to be horseback when I'm horseback," Carl said. Old man Gill was not persuaded. "Hope you like to be dead when you're dead, then," he said. "I reckon she's deadlier than a cobra." "I reckon you talk too much," Carl said, feeling more and more that he didn't care for Miles City. He found the old trapper, Hugh Auld, sitting in front of the dry goods store. It was a cloudy day, and a cool wind blew. The wind had a wintry feel, though it had been hot the day before. Carl knew they didn't have long before winter, and his men were poorly equipped. "Can you drive a wagon?" he asked old Hugh. "Yes, I can whip a mule as good as anybody else," Hugh said. Carl bought supplies, not only coats and overshoes and gloves, but building supplies as well. He managed to rent the wagon he had carried the salt in, promising to return it when possible. "You're restless," old Hugh said. "You go on. I'll creep along in this wagon and catch you north of the mussel shell." Carl rode back to the herd, but at a fairly slow pace. In the afternoon he stopped and sat for several hours by a little stream. Ordinarily, he would have felt guilty for not heading back to the boys right away, but Gus's death had changed that. Gus was not a person he had expected to outlive. Now that he had, much was different. Gus had always been lucky. Everybody said so, and he said so himself. Only Gus's luck ran out. Jake's had run out. Dietz had run out. Both deaths were unexpected, both sad, terribly sad. But Carl believed them. He had seen them both with his own eyes. In believing in the deaths, he had put them behind him. He'd seen Gus die, too, or seen him dying, at least, but it seemed he hadn't started believing it. Gus had left, and that was final, but Carl felt too confused even to feel sad. Gus had been so much himself to the end that he wouldn't let even his death be an occasion. It had just felt like one of their many arguments that normally would be resumed in a few days. This time it wouldn't be resumed, and Carl found he couldn't adjust to the change. He felt so alone that he didn't really want to go back to the outfit. The herd and the men no longer seemed to have anything to do with him. Nothing had anything to do with him unless it was the mare. For his part, he would just as soon have ridden around Montana alone until the Indians jumped him, too. It wasn't that he even missed Gus yet all that much. Only yesterday they had talked, as they had talked for 30 years. Carl felt some resentment, as he almost always had when thinking of his friend. Gus had died and left the world without taking him with him, so that once again he was left to do the work. He had always done the work, only he suddenly no longer believed in the work. Gus had tricked him out of his belief as easily as if cheating at cards. All his work, and it hadn't saved anyone or slowed the moment of their going by a minute. Finally, as night fell, he mounted and rode on, not anxious to get anywhere, but tired of sitting. He rode on, his mind a blank, till the next afternoon when he spotted the herd. The cattle were spread for 3 miles over the great plain, grazing peacefully along. No sooner had the hands spotted him than Dish and Needle Nelson came racing over. Both looked scared. "Captain, we've seen some Indians," Dish said. "There was a bunch of them, but they didn't attack us yet." "What'd they do?" Carl asked. "Just sat on a hill and watched us," Needle Nelson said. "We were going to give them 2 of these slow beeves if they'd asked, but they didn't ask." "How many in the bunch?" "We didn't count," Dish said, "but it was a bunch." "Women and children with them?" Carl asked. "Oh, yes, a passel," Needle said. "They seldom drag their women folk into battle," Carl said. "Probably Crow. I'm told the Crow are peaceful." "Did you find Gus?" Dish asked. "Pete can't talk about nothing else." "I found him. He's dead," Carl said. The men were turning their horses to go back to the herd. They stopped as if frozen. "Gus is dead?" Needle Nelson asked. Carl nodded. He knew he would have to tell the story, but didn't want to have to tell it a dozen times. He trotted on over to the wagon, which Lippy was driving. P.I. sat in the back end, resting. He was still barefoot, though. Carl saw at once that his feet were better. When he saw Carl riding in alone, he looked worried. "Did they carry him off, Captain?" he asked. "No, he made it to Miles City," Carl said. "But he had blood poisoning in both legs from those arrows, and he died day before yesterday." "Well, I swear," P.I. said, "I wished he hadn't." "I got away and Gus died," he added sadly. "Wouldn't you figure it'd be the other way around?" "I would if I had to make odds," Jasper Fent said. He was close by and had loped over in time to hear. Newt heard the facts from Dish, who soon rode around the herd telling the boys. Many of them loped into the wagon to get more details, but Newt didn't. He felt like he had the morning he saw Deeks dead, like turning away. If he never went to the wagon, he would never have to hear any more. He cried all afternoon, riding as far back on the drags as he could get. For once he was grateful for the dust the herd raised. It seemed to him it would have been better if the Indians had ridden in and killed 'em all. Having it happen one at a time was too much to bear, and it was happening to the best people, too. The ones who teased him and made sport of him, like Bert and Soupy, were happy as pigs. Even P.I. had nearly died, and except for the captain and himself, P was the last one left of the old Hat Creek outfit. All the men were annoyed with Captain Carl because he told of Gus's dying brusquely, got himself a little food, and rode away to be alone, as he always did in the evening. His account was pregnant with mysteries, and the men spent all night discussing them. Why had Gus refused to have the other leg amputated in the face of plain warnings? I knew a spry little fellow from Virginia who could go nearly as fast on crutches as I can on my own legs," Lippy reported. "He had 2 crutches, and once he got his rhythm, he could skip along." "Well, Gus could have made a cart and got him a billy goat to pull it," Bert Borum suggested. "Or a donkey," Needle said. "Or dern pigs. They're so smart," Soupy said. Both pigs were under the wagon. P.I., who slept in the wagon, had to listen to their grunts and snores all night. Only the Irishman seemed sympathetic to Gus's stance. "Why, it would only have left half of him," he said. "Who wants to be half of himself?" "No, half would be about the hips," Jasper calculated. "Half would be your nuts and all. Just your legs ain't half." Dish Boggett took no part in the conversation. He felt sad about Gus. He remembered that Gus had once lent him money to visit Lorena, and this memory lent another tone to his sadness. He had supposed Gus would go back and visit Lorena, but now clearly he couldn't. She was there in Nebraska, waiting for Gus, who would never come. Into his sadness came a hope that when the drive was over he could draw his wages and go back and win Lorena after all. He could still remember her face as she sat in front of the little tent on the Kansas plains. How he had envied Gus, for Lorena would smile at Gus, but she never smiled at him. Now Gus was dead, and Dish determined to mention to the captain that he wanted to draw his wages and leave as soon as the drive was finished. Lippy broke down and cried a time or two, thinking of Gus. To him, the mysterious part was why Gus wanted to be taken to Texas. "All the way to Texas," Lippy kept saying. "He must have been drunk." "I never seen Gus too drunk to know what he meant," P.I. said. He, too, was very sad. Seemed to him it would have been better if he could have persuaded Gus to come with him. "All the way to Texas," Lippy kept saying. "I wager the captain won't do it." "I'll take that wager," Dish said. "He and Gus rangered together." "And me too," P.I. said sadly. "I rangered with them." "Gus won't be much but a skeleton if the captain does do it," Jasper said. "I wouldn't do it. I'd get to thinking of ghosts and ride off in a hole." At the mention of ghosts, Dish got up and left the campfire. He couldn't abide the thought of any more ghosts. If Deets and Gus were both roaming around, one might approach him, and he didn't like the thought. The very notion made him white, and he pitched his bedroll as close to the wagon as he could get. The other men continued to talk of Augustus's strange request. "Why, Texas beats me," Soupy said. "I always heard he was from Tennessee." "I wonder what he'd have to say about being dead," Needle said. "Gus always had something to say about everything." Pocampo began to jingle his tambourine lightly, and the Irishman whistled sadly. "He never collected all the money he won from us at cards," Bert remembered. "That's the bright side of the matter." "Oh, darn," P.I. said, feeling so sorrowful that he wanted to die himself. No one had to ask him what he was darning about.